Hi, everyone, and welcome to day 3 of International Careers Week. We are so excited to have Mark here with us today. Mark is the co founder of a nonprofit organization called Global Nomads Group that collects hundreds of thousands of youth around the world to get them to learn about each other's cultures and lives and to discuss important world issues. Mark transitioned into the tourism industry in 2006 and built a small hotel. In Denmark, you will find him working as a barista in his hole in the wall cafe, the Nomad and The Bean, which he opened in 2017 when he entered into the international coffee business. Thank you so much for joining us today, Mark.
Thank you so much, and the Montana World Affairs Council as well. I'm very excited to be with you guys and looking forward to the next, half an hour to 45 minutes.
Mark, why don't you just start off telling us a little bit about how you got into your career?
Yeah, that sounds like a good place to start. I think I'd like to begin with well, it's a while back, but let's start with after I graduated from university. I worked for about a year. I graduated from an American university in Paris. And worked for about a year with a group called Insula, International Scientific Council for Island Development, and that's where I got a year's worth of experience in the NGO world. But I was because I had grown up all over the world. I moved every 3 years to a different country. I was very passionate about creating awareness for other cultures because of all these countries I had lived in. I'd go to the US to visit my relatives. I'm half German, half American, and they would know so little about the other places I lived. So I really wanted to connect young people, mainly high school students around the world, to learn about each other's cultures and lives. So I started this NGO. Of course, at that age, I expected to raise millions of dollars in a few weeks, and off we go. That didn't happen. We had to work hard, but we were passionate. The organization now, Global Nomads Group, is based in New York. There are about 30 plus employees. I am not an employee there anymore. I advise sometimes, but I'm not an employee. What happened was when we were based in New York, I went to Mozambique to do a 3 month project, and I ended up staying over 12 years. I had reached a point where I felt the organization needed to get to the next level, and we needed to bring on people who were even, who were more skilled than the founders. So what we did was, I basically left as a paid employee and went onto the board of directors. But I fell in love with Mozambique, and Mozambique has 3,000 kilometers of beautiful coastline, and I'm passionate to create awareness for the things that I feel are of interest to me. And I kind of almost, maybe I shouldn't even say this, but I almost fell into the tourist industry because I loved Mozambique and I wanted to create awareness for the beauty of Mozambique. On the weekends, the capital Maputo, I was going to the most southern part of Mozambique, a place called Ponta Dora, the Point of Gold, where you have like 20 reefs for diving, you have like humpback whales, you have wild dolphins swimming. So I decided to get into the tourism business, and again, this was not with loads of money. I had saved up a little bit of money, but it was less than $50,000. And this is an important piece of advice. When you start something and you have a budget, that's never what it's going to be. It's always going to be more. So just keep that in mind. But so I started a very small. What I did was I built a small hotel right by the beach in Ponta Doro, and of course didn't have enough money. And I got investors, and that was a challenge. But I brought some investors on board, and we built this small hotel, and I got into the tourism industry. And I still run that hotel from a distance. So I do the marketing and the bookings and all that. But some years back, about 10 years ago, I was hired to do a startup in the tourism industry in Myanmar, in Burma. And in Burma, um, basically, well, I was very privileged in that I got to visit a lot of beautiful places in Myanmar and set up connections, with boutique hotels. But what was for me very important was setting up experiences because it's not just about going to a destination and looking at what hotel you're going to stay at. It's about the beauty of the place. So I set up experiences in Myanmar, and one of them in the capital Yangon was to taste coffee. I always liked coffee, but I'd never, gotten into coffee professionally. But for that experience with that startup in Myanmar, one of the experiences was tasting coffee. And after tasting coffee, you could visit the plantation, which was a few hours outside of Myanmar, and see where the coffee came from. That was my first introduction into the coffee business. After about 2.5 years, we moved to Denmark, where my wife is from. Our institute is based here. And when we got here, I thought, I was so passionate about the coffee. I'm like, I'm going to continue this. And this Burmese coffee, no one had heard of Burmese coffee, and it was a very high grade coffee. So I decided to start importing Burmese coffee, and I opened this little hole in the wall cafe here in Copenhagen. And that was 7 years ago. So I've been in the business now, in the coffee business, for 7 years. And that's where I'm at.
Well, awesome. Well, students, if you guys want to start typing in your questions, we can get going. But Mark, why don't I just start us off? I'm curious. I want to know more about the coffee that you do. What does your place look like?
So
You say hole in the wall, so I'm very curious.
yeah, hole in the wall. Look, right now in Copenhagen, it's winter time, and it kind of gets dark at 5 o'clock. And our cafe actually closes at 5. But I'm going to give you a little tour. Maybe you can see out the window. There's a little red sign that says coffee. I don't know if you guys can see that.
Yeah, I can see a little bit of a red sign.
Yeah, so that's the little hole in the wall. And when I say hole in the wall, I literally mean like when there are 12 people in the cafe, it's full house. Like that's what it is. It's full house. So of course I do a lot of takeaway as well. People come in to get their takeaway coffee. But it's a small place. But that's kind of what makes it cozy, the neighborhood, it's not easy to meet Danish people, and a lot of foreigners that come here are a little, I was privileged because I'm married to a Dane, but a lot of the foreigners are a little bit lonely. And what's nice about this neighborhood cafe is that it connects the foreigners with the locals, even though it's a small hole in the wall, it's cozy. Yeah.
So we got some questions coming in here, Mark. So can you explain the global supply chain of the coffee you serve?
Yeah. So the global, it of course starts out in the coffee producing countries, right? So it's coffee is pretty much the the most widely traded tropical plant or product in the world. There are about 25 million family households that deal in the coffee industry. And the coffee belt itself, I mean, it stretches from North, Central, South America to Asia, Africa, East, Middle East. I mean, coffee is pretty much expands the world. And in the 1990s, around 1993, there was about 100 million 60-kilo bags that were sold. And in 2023, that number pretty much doubled to about 200 million. So you're talking about, I mean, for the beverage industry, I mean, that's a lot of coffee, right? So yeah, you have the distribution you have the coffee producers, but you have the exporters, the importers, the wholesalers, and like myself, the retailers. So coffee, mainly goes from producing countries to consuming countries, right? So yeah, that in a nutshell is pretty much of the coffee industry, right?
Yeah. So we have another question here. Has joining the coffee industry made you appreciate coffee more?
Wow, I love that question. Definitely, because when you're in the industry, regardless, at least in my opinion, of what part of the coffee chain you're in, you have to gain a little bit more knowledge about different qualities of coffee when you are tasting. Of course, it's a matter of preference. Someone might like a really dark, bitter coffee. Doesn't mean it's bad. They like that, and someone might like a sweet coffee. But you need to have knowledge about, especially when you're a roaster. I got into roasting some years back, so I don't just import roasted coffee. I roast my own coffee, and you need to have knowledge about the green bean. You need to know the moisture content of that green bean. You need to know how you're going to roast it. You need to know the details of where that green bean came from. So I definitely have, back in the day, I thought, I was drinking such an amazing cup of espresso in Paris at, practically any cafe I went to. Recently, when I was back in Paris, I almost spit it out. It was terrible because I've gotten spoiled. I've gotten spoiled because of the high grade coffee that I'm involved in, the special, what you call specialty coffee. So yeah, definitely once you get in the industry, you're going to actually get a bit spoiled because of your knowledge of higher quality coffee, if that makes sense.
So when you go and order a cup of coffee, what do you order?
Oh, when I order
What's your go-to order here, Mark?
So, okay, I've got to be very transparent and honest with you because my favorite coffee is what you call a cortado. So you have, which I also very much like, which is just an espresso, right? But a cortado is equal amount of espresso and milk. And so it's a very small cup. And what's important is that if you're paying a lot of money for a high grade coffee, you want to be able to taste it, right? So for me, it's important to taste the high quality coffee. So I like it either as an espresso or as a cortado.
We have another question here from Bozeman. How have recent events in Myanmar impacted the supply of your coffee?
This is such a nice and, to be honest, rather sad question because the political situation in Myanmar took a turn quite some years back. We're talking now 3 years ago, where um, General Lang, the military, basically took over. They, called the elections a fraud, even though Aung San Suu Kyi had won by a political, I mean, it was a landslide that she had won the elections. So right now the situation is very sad in Myanmar. It's really not going well at all. And when you import coffee, you have to have certain things in place. Firstly, right? You have to have certain documents in place, uh, how the coffee was treated, how it was cleaned, etc. And with what happened 3 years ago, I didn't want to deal with these military guys who had taken over. What they, in my opinion, have done to Myanmar is absolutely unacceptable. Um, so I had to switch. Now, the Burmese bean was actually originally a um, a hybrid Brazilian bean that was planted there. And the farmer, who I know personally, he's dealing with informal trading on the Thai border, but that's not something that I could get involved in or even wanted to, So I switched to some years back to roasting a Brazilian bean that comes from one plantation in Brazil. So a long answer to that question was really I don't import my beans anymore, sadly, from Myanmar. And if the political situation improves, I will reconsider going back to roasting this amazing bean that I had fallen in love with when I was there.
From Manhattan, what is your best-selling coffee?
What is my best?
Seller.
Sorry?
What's your best seller?
My best seller. Okay, my best seller is a latte, actually. I would say, yeah, a latte. So again, I want to emphasize that in all of the drinks I make, I could sell a latte that is, I'm trying to find a cup here, that is, much bigger with a lot of milk and have a higher price. That's not the point. The point is my lattes are even a certain size where you can taste the expensive coffee. As I had mentioned before, you don't want to pay so much money and taste milk. So even my lattes, which are my biggest ones, my lattes and cappuccinos are the biggest ones. You still taste the expensive coffee, but I would say my best seller is a latte. Except I'm going to correct myself in that students order what you call a dirty chai latte. So that actually has tea in it too. I don't know if all of you know what a dirty chai latte is. I
It's
think it's
my
very
go-to
popular in the
order.
US. Yeah, because you get the caffeine from the coffee and the caffeine from the tea. So, students like it because it keeps them awake, with their studies. But yeah, a latte, to answer that question, is probably my most popular item.
I will also say it helps when you have toddlers staying awake.
Also very true.
We have another question. What is your biggest fear for the coffee industry?
Well, we have to realize the shift with climate change, right? Climate change, coffee is very vulnerable to climate change. So I do believe that this could affect the coffee industry and a lot of families in coffee producing countries, right? Because if suddenly their crop isn't growing anymore or not producing high yields, they're in trouble. So, I think there will be a shift in coffee producing countries. We are seeing, though, that specialty coffee is on the rise, right? Where it's, very, very focused micro lots. But yeah, for me, the biggest worry about the coffee industry is, are we able to adapt responsibly and correctly based on, climate change? So I would say that that's really something that we all need to be aware of, and not just in the coffee industry, in all industries, right? Pretty much.
What is the strongest coffee in the world? Is it based on brew or the bean?
That's a good question. So you have two main, actually, you have 120 species of coffee, believe it or not, of the coffea. But the two main ones are Arabica and Robusta. Now, Robusta, if you drank pure Robusta, you would probably spit it out. Very, very, very intense, right? But it does have double the amount, almost double the amount of caffeine that Arabica has. So Arabica is your very expensive coffee that you have. But what some people do, some of the roasteries, and I mean the specialized roasteries, the ones that are dealing with specialty coffee, because on a large supermarket scale, the Robusta that goes in is just because it's cheaper coffee. Robusta grows at lower altitudes, easier to grow. But right now you have fine Robusta that has more caffeine in it that specialty cafes are using as a blend. I have my 100% Arabica, but for my filter coffee, for the morning coffee, for my regulars who buy whole bean for home, I have a blend that has 20% Robusta, just because it has more caffeine. It's stronger. So Robusta is stronger than Arabica, but you wouldn't probably enjoy it that much drinking it 100%, if that makes sense.
How do you ensure that your coffee is harvested and produced in ways that are socially and economically sustainable?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, there are different ways, and I think we are finding roasteries that are more and more so seeking out either the big or small coffee importers that are implementing fair trade methods, or they're dealing with what you call direct trade, right? So in Myanmar, you could use me as an example. I was doing direct trade where I'd been to the plantation. I knew the farmer and I knew the methods that he was implementing. But at the same time, depending on where you're based around the world, a lot of countries, like the food ministries, for example, will also have regulations where, they want to see how the coffee was grown. They want to have certification for the different methods used. How was the coffee washed? If it was washed in that method or naturally dried. So there are these different ways that I think you can focus on to be more sustainable and more responsible. Is the plantation involved in reforestation of the area? Are they growing their coffee what you call under shade, like natural trees, which a lot of farmers are doing now as well? So there are these different things that you can do to make sure that you're playing your part in that responsibility effort.
We have a couple questions that are asking the same thing. How did you start into the coffee industry?
So how did I start in the industry? So initially, when I was in Myanmar in the tourism industry, I set up an experience where, I like literally, I had, not far from where I lived, I'd been smelling this amazing coffee, and I went in there and just started asking questions and got into, where that coffee came from, and decided to set up this experience where you could, where tourists coming to visit Myanmar could do a coffee tasting in the capital, and then they could actually go and visit in a place called Puino Lin up in the hills outside of Mandalay, could visit the plantation. But having said that, I was still in the tourism industry in Myanmar. When I moved back here, I said, look, I would like to get into the coffee business. And I wanted to be on the retail side because there are a lot of different parts of the coffee business you can get into. But I wanted to get onto the retail side where I would have my own cafe where, lots of, amazing things can happen, good conversations and all kinds of, interesting things. So I got into the coffee business on the retail side by opening a little cafe here. And then further down the line, I took some classes on roasting and got my SCA certification to be a roaster and got my roaster. So I started roasting my own coffee further down the line. But entry into the coffee business, there are lots of different areas that you can enter. It depends what you're interested in. You've got to be passionate about it. That's the biggest advice I can give you is, you want to get into the coffee business, you got to be passionate about it. And what part of it? Do you want to be a farmer? Do you want to go and, plant coffee? Do you want to be an importer and then sell it to other places? Or do you want to be a retailer and have your own cafe? There are lots of different areas, but most importantly, you got to be passionate about it. And then you'll learn the skill sets that you need as you begin your adventure into coffee.
What is the most expensive coffee and what makes it so expensive?
Wow. I think we almost need to ask our good friend Google. Right now, today, the most expensive coffee, I'm not 100% sure, but it's based on a number of different things. One, the quantity, obviously, right? When you don't have a lot of quantity, whatever it is, it's going to be expensive. But the quality, there's a certain ranking of coffee that the Specialty Coffee Association will rank. You get a certain ranking based on a number of things. The amount of defect, because all coffees will have defect. When it's a very minimal amount of defect, less than 5 in 300 grams of coffee, it will be considered a specialty coffee based on the defects, based on the roasting, based on when you do these Q graders are specialized in tasting the coffee. So based on all of these things, you get scores. And an extremely high scored coffee is going to be very expensive, right? So it really depends on the supply, but also on the ranking of that coffee. That will affect, of course, the price.
What is the average cost of a cup of coffee at your shop?
So I need to be very careful how I say this because everyone's going to go, "What? That's so expensive!" But it's based on the region, right? Like Scandinavia in general, Denmark is one of the most expensive countries in the world to live in, right? And also our taxes on every cup of coffee I sell, 25% goes immediately to the government. Then you also have rent to consider. Then you also have electricity to consider, right? All of these costs are very high. So yeah, my coffee, let's do the calculation if someone has a currency converter. So my latte costs 48 kroners. Now, who's good at math? Divide that by what? By about 12, 18, 20. Oh my gosh, I'm getting nervous. You guys are going to stop talking to me. It's like, let's see, what would that be here? I'm right here on my thing. I'm going to do it right now, okay? Let's see, Danish kroners to US dollars. Here we go. Got the calculator right here. Okay, so 48 kroners. So basically $7. $7 for a latte. That's the price in Copenhagen at my cafe, and I would say that my cafe is medium to medium price. So you can find some that are a little less and some that are a little more.
I actually don't think that's that expensive.
Oh, thank you. Then come visit. Come visit.
All right, I'll be on a plane next week. Don't tempt me. All right. Is it possible to mix the beans of different types together?
Yeah. So again, I want to distinguish between specialty cafes and people dealing with specialty coffee and the mass-produced supermarket coffee where they talk about blends. And often when they talk about blends, it's because they're mixing cheaper coffee with a little bit of expensive coffee, and then they call it a blend. Ooh, great! But recently, maybe not even recently, in the last years, you can produce. So initially, a single origin specialty coffee that has amazing notes and flavors of XYZ. Why do you want to blend it? Why would you want to mix it? But what some roasters get excited about is how can you take two coffees that taste pretty amazing, but blend them and combine those flavors and enhance them. So there's a way, if that's the direction that your specialty cafe is going in, to blend certain coffees and experiment. And again, you have to remember it's all about taste, right? So if you're a roaster and you want to blend coffees, well, you're blending and tasting, and if that blend tastes better than one of the single origins that you roast, then why not mix them together and create a blend of a coffee, right? So yeah, it's definitely possible to have a blend of coffees that complement each other and bring out a nice taste.
Can we talk about what is your opinion on organic versus not organic?
Oh, yeah, I'm going to refer also to not just the coffee industry, but the industry in general, like what the definition of, organic is and what that means. And, I think that the if it's all followed properly, etc., you know, then those methodologies are more responsible and better for the environment. And you'd say, okay, great. But it's in my opinion, it's a fine line. It's a very fine line because there are, and I have visited plantations that are not considered organic, but they are. They just haven't gotten maybe the certification, or they don't even know how. So they are not calling their coffees organic, but they're following lovely methodologies that are also responsible. But so I don't, if I'm buying something that says organic on it, or fair trade on it, I still want to understand what that means. The other day I bought something that said, which was completely deceiving. It said fair trade on it. And I said, okay. And I looked at the back, and in small letters, it said a percentage of this cocoa in this chocolate bar is fair trade. So they were allowed to have a sticker on the front that said fair trade, but on the back, part of it wasn't fair trade. I mean, so be aware of organic, and do your research.
Do you plan on making your shop larger or add an additional location?
So about, yeah, some months back, and whoever goes to the no, nomadandbean.com will see this. I have a section that says mobile unit. So I have a very cool mobile unit that I have tested out, but it's winter here, extremely cold. So I've tested this unit out about 5 times. And in the summer, we are going to be creating awareness for the whole bean that we have available on this mobile unit, serving filter coffee. So filter coffee is kind of becoming popular again in Scandinavia, and so we're going to be serving filter coffee and selling whole bean on this mobile unit. But it's a whole different ball game if you have a small cafe and you want to sort of, increase and create a specialty coffee chain. There's a lot of energy that you need to focus on doing that. And I think that's important. You got to question, yourself before you do that, if that's what you want to get into, you know? Um, I know that if I had lots of coffee places around Denmark, I might most likely would have less time to enjoy my regulars in the cafe that I have right now. And that's kind of important to me too. So a lot of things to consider. But yeah, I do have a mobile unit, and I may have a few more mobile units over the next year or so. We'll see.
What is your best memory with starting the cafe?
My best memory. You know, I got lots of good memories, but my best memory, I'll tell you what. Um, it's a difficult question. So, one, of course, when I first opened, I met some incredible local people who still come 7 years later almost every day for their coffee, So creating those friendships was really nice for me. It was really important because lots of things happen over a good cup of coffee, right? That dialogue is important for me. And I've told many Danes this because it works both ways, right? Because it's like when you go to the barber, same thing, right? You go to the cafe and you talk, right? You tell about all your problems, and your issues, and you want to talk to the person there, the barista. And I'm like, but it works both ways. When I have problems, I'm going to tell them to you as well, right? So the idea is, conversation. And I have great memories of incredible conversations with, regulars that, well, that still come to the cafes. For me, that's probably one of my most memorable memories are the exchanges I have with the regulars.
So we have a question here, and I may not be able to answer, but I'm going to ask it anyway. How would you
Yeah.
change your business model if your cafe was instead in the US versus Germany versus China markets?
Um, yeah, I can answer that question because, you have to look at the cultural differences and, the tastes. There's a lot of things to think about. In Scandinavia, you actually a lot of coffees here are what you call a light roast, right? Where you roast very light. Um, and you have less, how do I say this? I think, well, we all know Starbucks, right? So you have less of the things that you put in, right? If I was to open a cafe in I think, as an example, in say the US, I would have to be a lot more flexible. I wouldn't be able to say I only have one. No, I have two actually. I have a salty caramel syrup that I put in, and I have a chocolate syrup. I think I'd have to have a lot more variety to add into to my coffees than I need here in Denmark. So you have to know that each place there's a difference in taste and an interest in what complements also the coffee, right? So I think you've got to do your research on each location. You know, that's important. So I would definitely want to do my research and of course the U.S. is huge, right? So it also depends on what location in the U.S., right? I'm sure coffee drinkers might appreciate their coffee in a different way in Montana than in Manhattan. Who knows, right? You have to do your research.
What is the worst coffee you have tasted, and what made it taste bad?
Hmm. So, um, some people do like bitter, right? They like that bitter taste, and I don't. For me, I'm on the exact opposite. I like supremely smooth finish, and not such a bitter taste. And sometimes on the highway, long road trip, needing a coffee, and I didn't have my like little grinder and my mini. I do have a mobile thing that I bring with me, but being a coffee at a gas station from a machine, yeah, I've done that a few times, and it's never very enjoyable.
What would you say is the most popular coffee in Denmark?
Most popular. It's a difficult question because most popular. I mean, you know, consumers in Denmark. Again, we're talking like I have a niche, like specialty cafes here. In general, about I guess 69-70% of coffee consumers consumed at home as like almost as filter coffee, right? It's a huge market, right? So, home consumption as opposed to, high-end coffee at your specialty cafes, there's a difference between those two. It's important to distinguish that. That most popular coffee, it really depends. But going out to specialty cafes, it's become popular in the last maximum maybe 6-7 years to go and spend a little bit more money on what is considered a specialty coffee, a high-end coffee, which is different. And I do have regulars who are like, Mark, I've had a couple of pretty bad coffees this morning at home, and now I'm coming to spoil myself for a good coffee, right? So, most popularly drunk coffee is still filter coffee at home. but people like to spoil themselves with a good coffee, you know?
All right, this question has been asked a few different times. Can we buy your coffee online?
Yes, but here, you know what? About a month ago, I think I did send a couple of bags to the US, but it's really expensive, because of the import, right? I can't remember what I have online. I think it's like when you buy the coffee, I think there's like an automatic either 15 or $20 in, export, in your shipping, and then the coffee itself. I've got like here, I actually brought a couple of bags. I've got I don't know if you guys can see this. I've got a 1 kilo bag. When you buy specialty coffee, you got to see the roast date. So I have my roast date here, which is the 1st of February. So this was just very recently roasted. And that's 1 kilo. And then there's more information on the back. So whenever you buy coffee, look for the information. When was it roasted? You don't want to go and buy coffee that was roasted even half a year ago, because coffee starts losing flavor immediately. So in the smaller bags, I have these smaller 250-gram bags. Also, the information is here, the roast date, when was it roasted? So, if you're gonna pay for 1 kilo, my 1 kilo bags, they actually cost 299 kroners. That's like it's about almost $50 for a 1 kilo bag, right? That's a lot of money. So you want to look at the details of the plantation, when was it roasted, and all of that. But yeah, long question, long answer to the question is you can, but it's not cheap, But yeah, but I'm also on Instagram. So those of you who are interested, sometimes I do these presentations I do a lot of trainings of baristas, on my machine about how to make the perfect espresso. So sometimes you can find on that I'm doing a little broadcast or info on Instagram, which is Nomad and Bean. It's probably a much more popular social media platform than that, but that's what I use now. I use Instagram, so you guys can find me on Instagram if anybody has a question or wants to message me. And whoever comes to Copenhagen will get a free coffee when they come to the Nomad and the Bean. You just have to say that you participated in, the Montana World Affairs conference, and you guys will, you'll get a free coffee. Yeah.
All right, we have time for probably two more questions. Is it true that some pre-grounded coffees can have bug parts in it, or is that an unconfirmed rumor?
Can have bug as in bug?
Yes.
I'm sure that is possible. It wouldn't be acceptable, but yeah. But almost more important, not more importantly, but if you're going to get into coffee, an expensive coffee, a couple of things to think about. Immediately when you grind coffee, it starts losing flavor right away. So you don't like it. If someone comes into my cafe and says, can I buy this bag of coffee, 1 kilo? Of course I want to sell it. But if they ask me to grind it, I say, no, I'm not going to sell you this bag because it's going to lose its flavor. Unless you're having a big party and you're going to go through 1 kilo of coffee in a day or two, I will refuse to grind it for you. I will grind one of these bags as long as you promise to use it within a week, because it starts losing its flavor. It's much better, and you can Google online grinders where you grind the coffee each time you make a cup. It'll make a world of difference. So you can buy a decent, grinder. Just remember the blades shouldn't be metal. They should be what you call burr, Burr, because blades put heat to the coffee, and that also isn't good, and it doesn't grind it uniformly. But so I'm kind of veering off from the question. Yes, I'm sure some grounded coffee could have some, I haven't really heard of that, but it's possible. Yeah. But my advice is don't buy grounded coffee. Don't buy any grounded coffee. Buy a whole bean and grind it yourself. Then there are no bugs in it.
All right. My last question is, what final advice do you have for students that are going to start their career soon, go into the tourism industry, or go into the coffee industry?
Um, so first thing I think most important is if you're graduating from high school, I would strongly encourage to explore, university. Get yourself a university a degree. Consider a degree in maybe business or entrepreneurship that will open up the doors to getting into the tourism or coffee industry. At the same time, it's important. Let's take the coffee and tourism industry specifically. Don't go into either of those industries if you aren't interested in interacting with people, right? That's important. I mean, in the tourism industry, you have to enjoy languages. Languages are important, right? You want to learn about different languages because, in the tourism industry, you're going to be meeting people from all over the world, right? Very important. Languages are important. So you could think about, languages, but most important is to be passionate about what you're going to get into. That's the most important advice in either of those industries. You've got to go, okay, do I really enjoy interacting with people, and getting satisfaction out of seeing, people enjoying themselves from what you have brought them. That's the most important thing. Other skill sets you can learn, right? But an entry into all of that, definitely you want to, have a background, maybe, go to university and get a background in some of these, in business or entrepreneurship. That's kind of important. But if you're not passionate, don't get into the industry. You got to make sure you'll be excited about it. And I don't mean about everything. There are going to be times where you'll find it's not fun on this part of it or that part of it. But most importantly is, you know, um, you know, you can always find out by, in your local area where you live, just take a part-time job as a tour guide and see if you enjoy that. In the coffee industry, get a job as a barista. Get a job, part-time job as a barista, and see if you really enjoy that industry. And then you can further your skill set. So most important advice is make sure you're passionate about it before you get into whatever industry you decide to go into.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. And quickly, I just want to say thank you to our International Careers Week sponsors at the Dennis and Phyllis Washington Foundation, Humanities Montana, Stockman Bank, and Clearwater Credit Union. Thank you so much for joining us this morning, Mark.
I enjoyed it. Thank you so much. And I look forward to the next one.
Bye, everyone.